January, the first month of every year, a time of new beginnings, of fresh starts, when billions of people across the world all ideologically unite as one in the sole effort to make and try to adhere to their own promises to better themselves, leaving old troubles and unfortunate habits behind as they aim towards a brighter tomorrow. That was when it all began. A cool, peaceful evening breeze glided down the half-lit streets of Yokohama, rustling its way through trees and grass, and gently blowing through the hair of the occasional passerby. Although perhaps not particularly remarkable when compared against any other such night at this time of year, it was still none too unpleasant an experience all the same for the average person. The kind of evening in which one could usually quite easily find a certain sense of calm and comfort in the world around them. Unfortunately, Paul Verlaine was very far from being the average person. In fact, he was about as far from that as any living being could get. Or at least, that had always been his perception of the matter. Rounding a corner to walk along a certain small bridge overlooking a river, the blonde-haired Frenchman tugged at the tall collar of his beige winter coat and ducked his head down a bit lower, burying his neck into the safety of its shelter. He began to wonder why he'd even decided to go out today at all. Despite having spent literal years confined purely to the basement of the Port Mafia's headquarters alone, unable to leave for any reason, the idea of being outside, it seemed, still brought him no joy whatsoever, even now that he possessed his complete freedom once more, much less the reality of it. Where most people might have seen a lovely sunset that painted the world in gold, Paul could only glimpse the view of another day fading away into nothing before his eyes, just like he'd watched his old partner fade away in front of his very eyes so many years ago, when he gave his life for Paul the second time. Where someone else would have felt a nice, invigorating breeze, Paul could only feel an icy coldness biting at his skin unforgivingly, as if to punish him in some small yet meaningful way for his past sins. Just like his dearest and only friend, the man that he had heartlessly betrayed and left for dead, could only seem to feel the cold no matter where they went, or how hot the day might have been. Where any other person could normally have found peace in the silence and the solitude on an evening like this, he only found depression. And yet, at the same time, seeing other people walking together along the roads and hearing them talk happily to one another didn't exactly inspire anything in him but loneliness either. It just reminded him of the days when he had someone to walk beside him, and how those days have now gone and passed him by forever. If he had been of even remotely good enough humor, he might have laughed at the cruel irony of it all. Yes, indeed. Why had he decided to come out here again? What good was it all? It didn't bring him peace. It didn't make him feel better. Aside from causing him to feel more pain, it didn't even really make him feel alive. Nothing could. Everything felt empty, just like it always did, and at this rate, he'd actually return home just feeling 1,000,000 times worse than when he left. Just like he'd surely made his loyal, loving partner feel empty inside and 1,000,000 times worse than he already did when Paul finally decided to just turn his gun on him, to top off all of the emotional and physical abuse he had already done. Alright, that was it. He was going home right now. This walk was not helping anything whatsoever. All it was doing was making his mind more active than ever, making him dwell on the past more than ever, making him hate himself more than ever, and... Good Lord, Paul, it's over. Why can't you just get over him already? It's been over a decade now. He inwardly chided himself as he stopped in his tracks, slamming a frustrated fist down on the railing to his right side. You made your foolish choice, and you lost him forever because of it. He's with your brother now, and he's way better off without you. He always was. Just move on. Slipping his hand off the railing to hang back at his side, Paul turned around with a sigh, a deep, indescribable pain lining every inch of his usually unreadable expression. He closed his eyes tightly, fists clenched in an iron grip, his grimace growing with every second that he stood there, motionless, almost as if he were bracing for impact with some strange invisible force that was about to hit him at full speed, one that even he couldn't hope to stop or dodge. As a matter of fact, he was. It just wasn't a physical object that he was up against, but rather something far less tangible and, to him, far more terrifying. The weight of his own sins. Damn it! Why can't I just move on? He hadn't exactly intended to say it aloud, but before he knew it, the words had simply managed to slip from his mouth, coming out like a strangled hiss through gritted teeth as he lowered his head in despair. It was a futile, clearly rhetorical question, at least to Paul. He was sure he could think of a million reasons exactly why he couldn't seem to bring himself to move on, even after all these years. Before meeting his own little brother, his old partner was the only constant he had in life, the only one he had to hold on to, no matter what went wrong. And he was so kind and so selfless and so loving and so forgiving and so... No, he needed to stop thinking about him. He needed to stop thinking about any of this. He needed to get back home now. And he really needed a good stiff drink. Maybe he'd stop at that one bar on the way back home. What was it called again? Bar Lupin? Yes, maybe he'd stop by the... He had no sooner started walking than something had managed to grab his attention out of the corner of his eye, floating down in the river. Curious, he quickly turned to get a better look at it, walking up to the railing and peering out across the water sparkling in the gloaming. What was that? Ah! There, floating face down in the stream, was the body of a young man, entirely unmoving except for the pull of the current on his form dragging him slowly downstream. Without even giving it a second thought, Verlaine quickly shed his jacket, leaping down into the river below and swimming towards the figure in front of him as fast as he could. For the first time in what felt like ages, all other thoughts had suddenly fled his mind, leaving not even a ghost of their memory in his head, his only focus on the mission in front of him. He had to get to that person. He had to save him. As soon as the individual was within reach, he grabbed hold of him, hoisting him over his shoulder with surprisingly minimal effort, continuing to ignore the icy temperature of the water that surrounded them as he began moving towards the shore. He added weight on his body, only very slightly inconveniencing him in this task. 52 seconds later, he was pulling both himself and the man he had rescued up onto the nearby banks, struggling to catch his breath as he lost not a moment in checking the presumed drowning victim's pulse. Shit. He doesn't have one. Immediately laying him on his back on the soft grass beneath them, Paul prepared himself to perform CPR. Tilting the young man's head back gently and lifting his chin, Verlaine pressed his own mouth firmly against the stranger's and breathed into him twice while pinching the man's nose shut. Then instantly moved his hands, ready to begin chest compressions. It was then, as he began placing his hands on the victim's chest to start, that he noticed it for the first time. He's been shot. On the left side of his abdomen is a bullet wound, and likely a rather fresh one at that, he can't help noting, as he sees the fresh stain on the boy's dark brown coat, blood still seeping out from the wound even now as he leans over him. Damn it! He doesn't have time to worry about that right now. He needs to get him breathing. Everything else has to wait. He can't waste time on anything else, not even for a millisecond. Temporarily forcing thoughts of the injury out of his mind as quickly as possible, he continued with the resuscitation efforts he had started, counting each press as he went along, watching for the slightest sign of life. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Come on, wake up. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Don't die on me. 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. You can do this. You can make it. 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. Another 2 breaths, and then we start over. In a flash, Paul's mouth was back on the other man's, forcing 2 more rescue breaths into his lungs to the best of his ability. Then, just as quickly as he had begun, he stopped, hands already back at his chest, to begin again. Now breathe!